won't be bossy. Questions for the bioregional. Excuse me.
The new desalination plant was just finished in Oceanside. Do you think that you would use this the saline solution from that maybe to grow algae?
Yeah, I forget what the density of the saline water is from a typical desal plant, but we have looked at it, and it certainly works with our process. Yes.
The Israeli government, which has been doing algae work for some time, actually has a group of algae scientists over here, some of you know about.
They're actually here, yes, right now.
Yes. Has decided that GTL, using the Haber-Frosch process, is going to be an effective in-between source of liquid fuels. I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
As long as the techno-economics work out, I've worked with a number of large energy companies that have large installations of technology uses coal, and if the techno-economics make sense, yes.
Well, Sasol is building supposedly a $15 billion plant, Louisiana. Do you think that's a wise move, or is that a
Well, if they're spending $15 million,
Billion.
15 billion, I mean.
Well, it's a few orders of magnitude.
Yeah.
Can I just comment on this briefly? GTL is gas to liquids, starting with natural gas, is a lot further down the learning curve in theory than the technologies you're talking about. And I would say that it's very hard right now to witness real costs because we've had one project in Malaysia, didn't work out very well. We had Sasol for most of its life, has kind of operated in a different kind of financial world in South Africa. And the GTL projects going on in Qatar are behind the veil of whatever the gas pricing arrangements are there. All that said, I would say we've seen less learning in the GTL technologies than you might otherwise expect, and so I've actually become more pessimistic about this over the long term. And I think, I can't speak about the particular investment that Sasol is working on, but people who are investing in exotic technologies around the idea that gas in the United States is going to be $2 to $3 per million BTU are going to lose their shirts probably, because gas prices in the United States, there's a kind of pent-up demand that's now going to come out and be a little bit of exports, and so all of that suggests that we are going to see gas prices come up. I think that project is going to have a hard time.
Hi, my name is Bridget McDonald, and I work with the CEO at the Women's International Center, and I also work with Rotary International, and wanted to thank Fauna and everybody for all of this great research. I wish billions of people could see what we're hearing during these special days. So my question has to do with the ownership of research and proprietary technologies. Richard Branson for many years had offered via Virgin a $1 million reward for somebody who could come up with the technology to efficiently reduce climate change. What was presented by Sapphire seems like a wonderful contribution. And, in the interest of transparency, Sapphire might mention a couple of things just to guard against some of the occasionally negative press we hear about algae, but hopefully that's coming from people like the Koch brothers and, very well-funded, anti-climate science reduction groups. Long story short, do you think it would be helpful for governments to offer rewards and incentives for a lot of research to just come in and reverse this trend? When I hear that if we switch to electric cars, that's only going to reduce our CO2 emissions by 1%. I mean, it's amazing.
Should they? Yeah, absolutely. Government has been involved in every energy transition that the world has known about. So the same should be true today. Now, I'm sure there are quite a few large energy interests who would rather they not participate. In fact, that's their stated policy today, thinking of the large energy companies like Exxon, et cetera. But nonetheless, the government is involved, and they should be involved. They have to be.
Yeah, maybe I should say, in talking with one of the large oil companies one time, I asked them, were they concerned about climate change? And he said, oh, yeah, we're very concerned about it. And he said, what we're concerned the most is that people only operate under two modes. They do nothing, and then they overreact. And he goes, and what we're worried about now is that we're in the do-nothing phase of climate change, and we want to be sure that when they start to react, they don't overreact. And so when I look around the planet now and see the consequences that are coming from climate change and some of the conservative calculations that we make on these and what this is costing us, economically costing us, I'm amazed that we don't make any attempt to calculate those costs and incorporate a tax associated with those, a carbon tax of those onto, the fuels that are putting them out. So hopefully at some point, people will start to at least react, if not overreact to those, and then maybe we will get something put in place to deal with that.
And thanks for that. And as a footnote, Richard Branson has since removed the $1 million offer. It's no longer on his website. So my question is, for the 60 or so, proposals that came in, does he just get to keep those? And if so, I mean, all of us should copy him and, offer rewards and pull in lots of practical ideas. So thanks so much for answering.
The Branson thing is not a serious activity. But we have to have a sense of scale here.
Yeah.
How much do you spend on a project like the one you're doing?
Well, it's $138 million.
So $1 million
It's nothing.
is nothing.
Yeah.
So, and 25, but even when you think about the scale of the opportunity here, I would say the vast majority of innovative activity is oriented around the prize that comes out of the marketplace, which is why getting the price incentives right is so important, because those scale through the entire economy. And people then say, well, maybe government should step in and offer a really big prize, like $1 billion or something like that, at which point then it becomes hard to actually administer the prize in a way that creates the right kinds of incentives. So there's a lot that can be done to improve innovation policy in this area, but there's also a tremendous number of stunts, of which I would put the Branson activity very high on the list.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're publishing articles about opening up a hotel on the moon. I mean, to me, it seems like they should be fined for.
That might be a better idea.
Please consider offering your name for this.
Hello, my name is Kyle, and I'm a current undergraduate at UCSD studying environmental systems. And algae biofuels is something that's really fascinating to me. And in considering innovation in this field, I'd like to know your thoughts on alternative ways to improve the efficiency, and perhaps your thoughts on using electricity in a closed system to increase the amount of algae produced in an area. Just maybe some thoughts on where the field may be heading.
You want to start, Mayfield?
Okay. Yeah. Seems how that's what I do. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's relatively new technology in terms of the significant amount of research dollars that have been put into it. That really didn't start. Although I've worked on algae for 25 years, we didn't, as a country, make an investment really until about 2007. And just in the last 6 years, I think it's amazing how far we've come. When the Department of Energy had a roadmap meeting in 2009, the sort of numbers everybody threw out was, if we could get to 25 tons per acre per year and 25% lipid content, we'd be in great shape. And Sapphire is well above that, right, in both of those counts, 30 tons per acre per year and at least 35% lipid. So certainly we've made great progress. I think the opportunity is still there to make more improvements because we're early on in the game. But for me, the most important thing that we have to come to realize is that, every time I open the newspaper now, I see something that says, we're in this oil glut and oil's going to be back to $20 a barrel. And if people are thinking that, then they're going back into the mode of do nothing, right? If there isn't, some sense of urgency about climate change, about the cost of oil, about food. The Arab Spring has very little to do with democracy and a huge amount to do with the cost of food, and that cost of food has gone up because the price of oil has gone up, the price of energy has gone up. So all the warning signs are out there that we should be investing in this technology and all technologies along this line, but I think we haven't hit that tipping point quite yet to overreact, and I hope we do soon.
I think from an industry standpoint on making algae more efficient, I mean, we certainly have to get rid of all that white stuff in the cultivation systems. Algae has to look a lot more like agriculture than that system I showed you. It needs to look like a rice field. It needs to be super efficient. It needs to be we have to be able to take that technology and plop it down in rice country and in algae, in areas where the ecology is such that we can grow it very efficiently. So it's production systems, it's improved biology, it's harvest. How do you take the dissolved air flotation unit I showed you that's in world scale, how do you eliminate that? How do you eliminate that from the process? So it's all about scaling, and it's all about improving technologies and getting rid of very energy expensive processes that we're using in this demonstration. Thank you.
Dr. Tom English, Creation Care Educator, Presbyterian Church, Synod of Southern California and Hawaii. My question is for Tim. Tim, could you use this sort of technology as a CO2 mining machine, where you would, say, have a goal to reduce your concentrations for the planet from, say, 400 parts per million to 350 parts per million in, say, 50 years? Would that make any sense?
I think we should ask the real smart guys in the room that question. I'm focused on turning it into a business. I would like to believe that I could do that, and I'd like to be able to stand here and tell you I could, but ask the smart guys.
So although there technically there's an opportunity, no, well, yeah, he was asking somebody else, but technically there's an opportunity to do that. But I think Tim's point is right, that we always need to consider what is the best economic benefit, because if you can make a profit doing something, then that can go to an enormous scale. And if you're just doing something for the betterment of the planet, even though it might be good for all of us, if you're not making any money on it, it's simply never going to scale to a very high degree. And right now, there's a much better economic return on selling that captured carbon in a form that somebody wants, rather than putting it back under the ground.
Yeah. Can I just comment briefly on this? In the CO2 mining business, it's crucially important to think about concentrations. And broadly, there are two kinds of CO2 that are out there. One is the CO2 that's in relatively concentrated format in smokestacks and things like that. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of things you can do with it. These guys are going to put some of it and make very high-value fuels out of it. There's technologies that are not outrageously expensive, but nonetheless are not free, like $100 a ton, maybe less, to capture the CO2 and put it underground. Then there's another whole planet of CO2, another whole realm of CO2, which is CO2 that's already in the atmosphere, where the concentrations, relatively speaking, are much, much lower. Mm-hmm. And there, the thermodynamics are really, really tough. There's a few companies that are working on this, where you capture the CO2 using giant fly swatters or something like that. I mean, not actually like flies, but, and pull it out of the atmosphere. That is still very much a research project. And there, nobody has a clue what the costs really are. Of course, there is a technology that does that right now, which is trees. And so you could plant trees and do that. Whether and how trees actually improve climate and so on is a more complicated question than it looks just on the surface. But frankly, right now, trees are a better bet than the fly swatters.
Thank you very much.
Okay, this is Shirley Mun from Nano Engineering. I work on lithium-ion batteries, so you know where the conversation is going now. So in my last sentence of the speech, I said that lithium is a positive ion, so it tends to attract negativity. But first of all, I want to be very clear that I'm 100% for advanced biofuel. Okay, so there's a couple of comments that I had. One is for Steve's first slides about comparison of the lithium ion versus the liquid fuel. I think your plot does not include the internal combustion engine efficiencies. If you do include, we're probably a little bit better, but the more important thing is I think it's important to realize that the batteries do not store energy from nowhere. We have to store energy from somewhere. So we are basically a storage and a conversion device. So the direct comparison with the energy density for the liquid fuel is a little bit unfair for the battery technology. But however, we do realize that for 300-mile driving range, electric vehicle is still maybe a decade or more away from reality. So I guess that's the important thing I want to point out since we have the general audience here. And I guess the second thing I want to mention is for Tim. In the LG technology, there is certain inefficiency, of course, in the technology that you are developing. I'm just curious, what are the form of inefficiency in your technology?
Since the technology is in its infancy, there's inefficiencies throughout the entire process. From photosynthesis, we can get more efficient there. That's a biology question. We can get more efficient at cultivation. How do you actually harvest those photons from the sun the most efficient way, and what kind of cultivation systems can you develop to use less energy in the process? Moving on to harvest, the same thing occurs in harvest and extraction of those oils. There's efficiencies all along the way that can be gained, and we're only into this for a few years. And because that goes directly to the bottom line of our process, we're investing in every unit operation.
Yeah.
But I do want to say, I hope you're amazingly successful in batteries, because there's only about 147 trillion road miles of lithium on the planet versus 786 trillion road miles of crude oil. And so, if you are amazingly successful, which I hope, that's good for the planet.
Yeah, and I love your slides on these pie charts. I would offer a proposal for you is if we can have cars that have hybrid of batteries and a biofuel as range extender, that's the best picture scenario
Absolutely.
in my opinion. So probably we should team up in terms of...
I agree.
Thank you.
I would say just quickly on batteries, one other point, which is that there are applications where battery-powered cars are great, and it's again just getting back to this idea of there's lots of different ways to save gasoline, and we're going to need to do little bits of all of it, and some people have the exact right driving pattern and the exact right setup where an electric car is good. On the flip side, of course, cars last a long time, right? And so any sort of transformative technology like that is going to take a very long time to penetrate. You've got to get new cars to be mostly electric, and then you've got to wait 20 years for the rest of the fleet, right? And so it takes quite a while to change that. Look at hybrids. I mean, we're at 3 or 4% after 15 years.
I just hope that we can be more harmonic.
Yeah, no. I think, well, right, and I think the point is really that you need this patchwork of policies, and if we're, you can't just pick one winner and hope that that's it, right? There's going to be cheap savings in gasoline from lots of different sources.
Hi, Eve Simmons. I am a climate disruption public speaker, and I thank you all for your wisdom today. The tar sands and the pipeline are particularly heartbreaking. I've got kind of a geopolitical question here. I'm thrilled to hear about the carbon tax being brought up, especially revenue neutral if possible. And Barbara Boxer's proposal to the Senate, hers with Ed Mackey in the House. I wondered what you gentlemen think of that. And I know Australia's had a fairly recent carbon tax passed with great success. I think they've had real surprises at how much they've reduced their emissions. So anyway, interested to see what you think.
Well, I'm sure everyone has views about this. I guess what I'll say is we've got to start to get the prices right, and a carbon tax helps us in that direction. We also need to be realistic about numbers. Right now, the politically feasible number in Washington is 0. But maybe we could get $10 or $15. The Europeans, the emissions trading scheme got up to about 30, and that was already starting to create some political difficulties. Now it's down at 6 to 10, and that seems to be tolerable, which might explain why Europe is now importing more coal and burning more coal than they did last year. They're up 8% year on year. So $10 sends a signal to move in the right direction. It doesn't change any of the fundamentals of what people are talking about here. It's more a signal about credibility that more is going to be coming down the road. And then you still need all kinds of other policies, R&D incentives and and so on. I think the Australian example is a very good one because the Australians, although the carbon tax in Australia is being used as a transition into a trading system, or that's what they say they're doing, the politics in Australia were done very cleverly because they've taken an earmarked portion of that tax to go back to the public in the form of income relief, portion to go into R&D and other activities and so on, some relief for export-oriented or exposed industries. And so if we're going to do a carbon tax, we have to do it in a way that's very, very smart about the politics and not kind of naive about that. Second thing I'll say very briefly on the tar sands is I wouldn't be so heartbroken about the tar sands. Lower oil prices will keep a lot of that in the ground. And all this drama about Keystone is just a complete waste of time, I think. Keystone will have essentially zero impact on the emissions trajectory because the economics of those projects right now are such that if it doesn't come into the U.S. via Keystone, it'll move by rail, probably west or east, probably west, across Canada, maybe part of the U.S., and it'll go out to the markets that way. So I think I understand politically why people have seized on Keystone because there's just nothing else happening. But it's one of these areas where we're having this huge debate about something that's actually not the problem. But it's a symbolic of people's frustrations in getting traction on the real problem.
Yeah, I think we have to make carbon solutions, just to follow up, I think we have to make carbon management and carbon mitigation and carbon reductions economic. The fastest path to solving the problem is to make a business out of it. I've come to believe that as a policy person. I've spent my life on public policy. I actually went to Kyoto with Gore. I think that international agreements on carbon are doomed, especially given the geopolitical nature of our world today, to fail, and they just delay they delay our getting to the business of reducing carbon globally. So we need to have a new approach, and it's not going to be done by regimes that are done by international treaty.
So you think the international stuff is worse than that?
Absolutely. I mean, because they're not making any progress.
So it's a sign that there's not credibility.
Exactly.
Well, we have 6 minutes left and 3 people asking questions, so if everyone can just give it brief, maybe we can get through all of it.
Sean Morgan, I'm a political science PhD student, and I work with the Center on Global Justice. Quick question, mostly from Mark and David, I think. From a political economy standpoint, how do you balance the sort of market imperfections on one side against the economic rents associated with subsidies on the other side? So in terms of targeted policies, what do you think are our best bets in terms of incentivizing the market in the right direction?
You have to start with subsidy reform. If you don't start with subsidy reform, which frankly is a little overdrawn right now because the total level of subsidy inside most of the open market-oriented economy is not huge. But if you don't start with subsidy reform, then everything else you do at the margin, which is going to be small anyway because of the political difficulties, is going to have a blunted effect.
I would say on appliance rebates and things in particular, there's a lot of interesting work going on about how you target those, how you avoid giving most of the money to somebody who's going to buy the new fridge anyway, or how you avoid them from keep them from taking that money and just buying a bigger fridge with it, or something, right? So, or a second fridge, right? So there's subsidies. Subsidies have a lot of difficulties, and taxes remove all of those, but add a political difficulty. So in some sense, maybe it's easier to convince people you're actually going to give them the money back from the tax than it is to get the subsidy right. Don't know.
So I have a quick question. In terms of the benefits and the costs, everything comes at a cost. And biofuels have been criticized for the use of water. Water is going to be more important than oil. And currently the production of 1 gallon of biofuel needs 3 gallons of water, as I recall. And of course, without the issue of the corn, being taken from the food from the mouth of people who need it into our cars, even if we're using switchgrass or others, I mean, can somebody give us a projection if this is sustainable or not, and also how much water is needed for the sapphire?
Well, my technology uses water that's not suitable for agriculture or human consumption. So it's either brackish or it's saline or salty, And we don't face any insecurity problems with the amount of salt water on the planet Earth. In fact, a lot of agriculture research today, in fact, we're doing some of it ourselves at Sapphire, is looking at how we can use saline water to grow crops. I know, Steve's.
Very quickly, it's very important also to look at all major fuels and what they use for water. And BP has an interesting handbook that's going to come out, I think, in June, which does this apples to apples comparison. Leans in the cellulosic direction because that's where their investments are. But not in terms of results, but there's more on cellulosic in the handbook than maybe other fuels and certainly algal options. But you forget how much water gets used in other technologies. Uranium launcher, for example, tremendous quantities of water used.
Wasn't there a piece of research done by Exxon on water that they published? It said that open pond algae production actually is equal to typical drilling. So,
But I think the solution is we have to go to saltwater sources, which we spend both my lab and Sapphire spend a fair amount of time doing. So there are marine algae that grow perfectly good in very high salt. But I think we have to go to that probably in traditional agriculture as well. And I can tell you that many countries have been by my lab over the last few months to see if there's an opportunity for food production in algae using brackish or saltwater sources, because they don't have enough fresh water for traditional crop production.
Hi, my name's Elena. I'm an undergrad, and I took Professor Mayfield's biofuels class last quarter. And you mentioned that Brazil went very quickly, or relatively quickly, from petroleum-based transportation fuels to like an ethanol-based system. And I was wondering how much of that was economic incentives and how much of it was policy. And if it was policy, like how is that effective, and why is it not as effective in the United States?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting study, because when they started producing ethanol from sugarcane in Brazil, it was a little over $7 a gallon. And the country simply, they didn't have their oil reserves at the time. So they saw this as a must for the country, and actually spent $15 billion in 10 years to bring that price down to $1.25 a gallon. So that was an enormously successful investment of the government. Now, in the meantime, they also discovered offshore oil deposits in Brazil, and that's why their economy is doing really well right now.
There's a good case study of this in the Global Energy Assessment, which was published 6 months ago. A massive study on all aspects of energy, and it's all online now, and it's a very nice case study led partly by the Brazilians, Jose Goldberg in particular, who helped mastermind that policy.
Okay, let's thank the panel very much.